Hello and good morning, and welcome to Talk About It Tuesday. I'm Tosca Di Matteo, founder of Tosca Coaching and Consulting, and I am thrilled to be here with you today to talk about leading with strengths with Liz Kahn, who will be joining us shortly. I don't know, why do I feel like this is, hold on, I'm going to wipe my screen. I don't know why I felt like it was like fuzzy. And here she is now. Okay. I'm super excited to have you meet Liz. So here she comes.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Welcome, welcome. Let me just first start off by saying, and I am like so excited to have you on. I'm so excited for this to be your IG debut with Kahn Consultants.
Um,
And I'm really excited for this topic about leading with strengths and how so much of what I've seen in my career is like the opposite of that. Um, but yeah, I think we both have this passion in this area, but I want to hand it over to you for you to share whatever it is about yourself that you want to share, like who you are, what you do, like the personal side, the professional side, whatever it is you feel comfortable with, and we'll just kick it off that way.
yeah. So I am Liz, and thank you for giving me this platform. You know that I was a little IG hesitant, so this is like, I dove in the deep end with you, so I'm excited. Um, but I'm Liz. I'm a native New Yorker, and I am a leadership coach. And I got into this work. Really, it started because I just got very, very lucky in my first job, where I had tremendous I worked for tremendous managers, leaders who really understand the people management side of things, how to develop their employees, recruit from within. And I just started to realize when I was talking to friends and colleagues that that was not what everybody got, right? And that this is an actual learned skill, right? Like leadership isn't luck, it's learned. And
Mm,
so over the years, I dove into some of the research, some of the training to be able to do this
mm,
for teams and individuals. Um, because also a lot of my background is actually in youth development. So I used to run a lot of programs to help young people transition to college and then career. And the way that we approach young people, whether it's you work in a program or you're a parent or an aunt, uncle, friend, neighbor, is that you always start with what makes somebody really wonderful. And when we get
mm,
to career, right? We've talked about that most people, you don't get that, right? It's a lot of focus on weaknesses and sort of how to keep people down, unfortunately. And so I love doing this work because it starts with what makes people great to begin with, right? Start with what you're doing well, and it just opens people up to opportunities for growth, reflection, to do the real work, to become the leaders that your organization is hoping for, that you want to really build people up so that they can make real change. So that's a little bit about what I do and why I do it. And yeah, where I'm from.
Love it. Yeah, and it's funny because I've been like letting my mind wander about this topic, and I think about one of the best cultures that I ever worked in was in my very first job, which was Wegmans Food Markets. And
Mm.
I was given management responsibility at the age of 17, right? And they saw my superpowers, they saw my strengths, and they nurtured them, and they gave me a chance, even though, I was sitting here managing cashiers and, that were twice, three times my age. And I look at that and I say, wow, and look at how long it took after that once I hit corporate America to actually be directly responsible for leading and managing others. And I'm like, it's just so crazy. Right. And part of it was
It is.
the industry that I went into. But I think part of it is it just made me think like if leading others is one of my superpowers, right? Then that could have been taken advantage of way early on. And I was doing it in indirect ways from the moment I stepped into like my corporate world, but directly, I don't know, it just made me think of just the difference in that culture because they also were, there's a lot of young people a lot of part-timers in, right, in the retail industry. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like in an environment where that is your lifeblood and it's not full-timers. Like it's almost like I feel like by nature you're forced to groom leaders. Otherwise, I don't know. I'm going on. I don't know if you have any
Oh,
thoughts on that,
I
but
actually think this is one of the many reasons people always talk about how much they love Wegmans, right? Like
mm,
we don't, I didn't have that most of my growing up life in New York, my childhood. But this is, I mean, like let's start there. Everybody loves Wegmans. It's something that gets talked about all the time. But also I think it's interesting because part of what you're describing, right, is that there's something about one, the culture that they have there, but two, there might be something about the age bracket, right, or the nature of the employees. And there's something that comes with moving towards corporate full time, heavily formal work environments where there's this stigma or weird assumption that we have to become hard and
mm,
strict. And that means less listening. If you give a little, you'll be taken advantage of. But when you're talking about a 17-year-old, you assume that they have a whole life outside of Wegmans, right? So you always look at them and the whole person. So you're probably going to know that they have to run to soccer practice 2 days a week and things like that, right? That's sort of the assumption, is that they have a life outside of this. But when we get to later in life, the assumption is like, I see you here and you need to fit into this box, and that's how it is. And it's sort of, it's a very, and then as managers, people try to live up to this sort of like, the harder I am, the stricter I am. It's sort of, it reminds me of
mm.
sort of a misuse of classroom discipline, right? Where like you have to be the strictest on the first day because that's how you set sort of systems and consistency for kids. But there's something about that, right? That we don't understand the loosening up factor when it comes to our professional lives. And it doesn't mean loosening up as in not caring or not investing or not doing a good job, but it really means, how do I listen harder, right? Like, how do I actually see people, understand them, to develop them and see them as their whole selves? Because your work is only one part of it. I was talking to a colleague and she made a comment to a supervisor she had worked with for 2 years. And it was something very basic about her life outside of work. And he was just like, oh, I didn't know that. It's like,
Mm.
how we can't have spent this much. If you don't know that, you don't know anything about me, right? And there's something really lost there, right? And it's just interesting about that Wegmans example, that where you happen to be young, and there just can sometimes be this real stigma and strange air of something, right? Arrogance that we have to take on as we get professional, because you want people to take you seriously. You want to be in charge, and sort of that's what it means to be a leader. It's sort of a very old school male dominant power structure situation, right? And so it's interesting because, so like you said, like so much of what you got at Wegmans, like why couldn't you have gotten that from a supervisor 10 years into your professional corporate career? Like it would have helped. They
Yeah.
missed out on the superpower, like you said.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's just so much in there. I'm like trying to hold on to all the thoughts that I had that I want to share. Um, I think that, well, first of what it makes me think of, right, is this shitty use of the word like soft skills and
Mm.
whatnot, right? Like, and it's just it's just a bad term, I think, to basically talk about the human side of like what we do. But the other thing it made me think of um, was, hold on, I lost it. Let me get it back. Um, I had it and I lost it again.
But I
Uh,
think your point is soft versus hard skills. I think that terminology has really, it took off. I don't know when, but it definitely has been for the whole host of my professional career. We would even talk to young people about their development in school and what it meant to be successful in terms of soft and hard skills. We would spend all this time, the soft skills are what really matters, right? Like that's what we would talk about. We would describe them as soft, and the implication of that word is a little bit weak or less than. Someone just said this could be a whole topic of, it's true. And these are people management and the cultivation of the strengths of individuals and how you run a team and team culture. Those are hard skills. These are learned
right.
skills. Because the idea about soft skills is somehow you're sort of going to innately understand them, right? They're sort of human skills that come with birth. And that's actually not true, right? And the one thing we know, right, about when you look at like the CEOs of the world, and they've done a ton of research, is the only thing that most people at that high end have in common who have really been able to effectively lead organizations, and I use the word effectively on
Mm,
purpose, is EQ. which is considered a soft skill, right? But that is the thing that really is the hallmark of a tremendous leader, right? That someone who is people want to work for, right? You don't just lead because you have a team of people under you. To be a true leader, people want to work for you. They want to follow you. They want to learn with you and think with you. And I think the soft skill terminology really underestimates the importance and the training needed to do that essential work to be successful.
And yeah, it diminishes, and when you look at how, how folks are evaluated, which is a whole nother freaking topic, right? Like feedback and evaluations and all that stuff, right? Like it's always focused on the results and not the how. And that's why you have leaders that only know about like the what, and they don't know the how of actually leading others. And that, like, I digress. Anyway, Ashley, I'm glad you shared that. And anybody who's on, for sure, ask some questions. You've got golden wisdom with Liz here, talking about strengths and leading with strengths. But one of the other things that came up for me, right, was this idea of compartmentalization of who we are, right? And I was always like, I like to say I was ahead of the curve, but for me, I was like, what you see is what you get. Like, I'm in the office. Look, you might get like a turned up, kind of polished, maybe I'm not swearing as much version, but you're still going to get me. You know what I'm saying? And in leading others, I think it's hard to find your authenticity in these work environments because not everybody is sharing all of themselves. And people are, like, to your point, aren't asking for you to share all of yourself, which is like, how the hell are you going to get the best out of your people if you don't know like what they care about when they step out of that office at 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, right? That's like wishful thinking, right? But, but
I think you said something important. I was just going to say that this idea of seeing your whole self and how important that is, and just how so many people feel for a whole host of reasons about showing up as their whole selves, and that what does it mean to part of being a good leader, right? You talked about leading authentically, right? So how do I actually show up as how I am as a leader, not mimicking, right, the success of someone who might sit beside me? There might be pieces of that that apply to how I show up, but the idea of just sort of like repeating sort of what someone else did is usually not the most successful or authentic route. But you said something about the how, not the what. And that is a tremendous point of tension that sort of, it quiets the feedback loop, and it really pushes away from this idea of seeing people for themselves. Because more often than not, the how we get things done can be done many, many, many ways. Most challenges, right? The how to meet them is incredibly diverse. But as leaders and as humans, it's very, very hard to let go of the how I might do something, right? Because you've done it before and you might have done it well, but there might be another way. And so to let go of that and lean into other people's, how they get things done, the way that they show up, and to nurture that and cultivate that in these really successful ways is a very, very intense point of tension. It's sort of like the original erosion of trust, right? Like you're saying to me that I don't believe in you, the way that you do things isn't right, which may not actually be the case. Does it get it done, right? Is there something interesting about that might be different than how I may have done it? And how do I get curious about that rather than get threatened? But that original erosion, it starts to say, well, when I show up as me or I do things how I might, that's not okay, right? And so that starts to fall apart. And so then the idea, then you could have a whole self, like outside of even, because I can't even be my work self here, it starts to chip away at that. And so you get these sort of formal relationships at work that really, get what you get out of them. And then we get into this loop where it's like, well, they don't deliver, they don't step up, they don't take initiative, but you have to go back and look at where were the cues that I gave them to do that, right? Where's the modeling that I showed them that that's actually something that is celebrated here? And me as a leader, do I actually know how to do that? Like, am I able to actually tune in to what's happening for other people, the how they get things done, and to realize that the difference in the diversity of the how on our team typically makes a much stronger, more productive and collaborative team. Like that's what the research shows us. But in the way that we hire, right? We hire for sameness, for likeness, right? It is a, it's just what we do. Oh, hi, pup.
I'm sorry. She's just
I'm so excited.
I'm bringing my whole self and my dog to the work environment, clearly. But please keep going because I don't want you to lose your train of thought on that.
No, I love it. They're all are welcome. All four-legged.
And we have a great question, which I want to get to. But before we do that, um, what you were talking about makes me think of the fact that some functions have different permissions for the how. So, for example, creatives, right, in ad agencies and all that stuff. Like, we know that creatives, they need space, they need time to wander. Maybe they work at 2 p.m. best, and they don't get to work until 11 a.m. Right? And there's like this forgiveness because there's this understanding. Well, that's how they're wired. But we don't do that on an individual basis. Like, you know what I mean? And it's just like these norms that have been created about what's acceptable and what's not, and who has the privilege and who doesn't to work in the how that best suits them. And oh my God, I love everything you're saying about just bringing all this to the table about the diversity and how we're honoring that and how we're not, and what cues and how we're modeling. And, I know you, ow, sorry, she's biting my hand. The how of like the behaviors, right? That how are we talking about and showing the actual behaviors that we want to see.
Yeah.
Because it has to be seen and it has to be rewarded in order for those behaviors, right, to continue.
It's also said sort of about like the culture for creatives, right? Yeah. And I think also about who's in charge now, right? Like generationally. And when I think about the tech industry as an easy example, right? The idea how the company runs, right, is that there's a lot of people, even outside of creators, you can come and go at the hour of your choosing. Right. There's what's described as a fun culture and sort of like, and like people are like, oh, those loosey-goosey, there's a bar, there's games, you can show up at 11, leave at 9. Like there's sort of a weird stigma, right? And people talk about, oh, these 20-somethings, they don't understand, right? Because that's, people stereotype like who works at those kinds of places. And we're still in this generational struggle, right? Around what are the norms at work.
Right.
And I think there's incredible tension there. And so often, still, sometimes people are faced with the person who you're reporting to holds those biases, those stigmas around, right? The entrenched way of working that has served someone, but not most, for such a long time, right? And there's, thank God, a tidal wave of change approaching, and that many organizations have invested in this idea about, true strength-based leadership, people management skills that they are learned. What would it mean to actually give people room for their how to actually get the best of our employees, right? To cultivate an in-house talent pipeline so we're not constantly recruiting externally and keeping certain groups of people at the bottom forever. But there still is a lot of stigma and bias around those cultures, right, are silly, that they're young, they're naive to a certain extent. And it's sort of interesting what you were talking about with the creatives. I think that, sort of seen similar to that. That's if you do that organizationally, again, it's seen as soft, not in the positive way, right? It's seen as sort of like loosey-goosey and, a whole host of other adjectives.
Yeah. Oh my God. And I love that what we've been doing, I think, so far in this conversation is just really unearthing, right, all this crap that's going on under the surface. And I always say, like, that's the shit that we have to be questioning and talking about and bringing up. And I love that Lauren starts to kind of, she's starting to get, okay, well, how, right? which I get, right? So she's like, how do you balance showing up as your whole self, but maintaining the presence of not sharing too much so it doesn't adversely impact your team? For example, personal struggle / home challenges, and et cetera. So what do you have to say about that?
I think it's a really, really good question. And I think that there's a different answer for everyone. I think the idea that how you do that is authentic to you, right? And so I think the most important piece is that how do I own up that when I show up at 9 a.m., there's a whole day that happened before, right? Especially for parents, right? Or caregivers of any kind. Or even just people who live with any other human or dog or whatever, right? Like there's a whole, so the attitude, the energy that you're showing up with at 9:05 a.m., comes with something else, right? And so to just sit in that for yourself and to know that for other people. And so if someone's having a slow day, they are short with you, they aren't as participatory in your team brainstorming meeting that started first thing in the day, to clue in to say, what's going on here, right? And so I think that when it feels right for you, the thing that I have appreciated most, and it showed me that I could open up, is that when I saw a manager, when we were leading, she was even leading a team meeting and said, there's things happening out there in the world right now, and I'm having a hard time. She didn't have to go all in depth. I didn't need to know if she cried till 3 a.m, right? Or what's going on. But, this is what happened. These things are happening, and just to know that I'm deeply affected by it too. And so if you need a little space, come to me, let's talk about it. And just know, like, I see what's happening. I've had managers say, I just want you to know that, like, I'm listening, but I'm going to take a couple extra notes because I was up till 4 a.m. because my 7-year-old was sick.
Right.
Right. And so if it's contextually helpful to let others know that it is safe, or to just clue people in, this is how I'm showing up right now. And you need to know that, like, this is me today. This isn't my whole working self, right? Because part of it is to authentically show people I'm extremely talented, I'm extremely successful, but there's nuances to my whole life that make my day-to-day at work at times fluctuate. It doesn't mean that my holistic performance is compromised in any way. It means that this afternoon I'm running a little low on the tank, right? Or I want you to know that I too read the news, right? This has been an incredibly difficult week. I understand that people are living this differently. I am too. And I just want you to know that I see that and I hear that. So I think it's really about what feels right to you, to let people know that you have a whole life outside of here, that they do too, and that you are not blind to the fact that that is part of your day. Anyone from, a 24-year-old young professional who's having a crush on someone who's distracted all day long, right? Like, I have been there, right? To what seemed like the silliest of problems. Like, I'm sitting here running a program, but I'm really thinking about some guy and whether he's going to text me, if you really want to drill down to it. Like, there's those levels of just, I didn't tell anyone because I had a team. I didn't need to be like, is this boy going to text me? No, that was something I didn't need to share. But we are all at times not 100%, right? Or just to show the humanity of you. I have always so deeply appreciated that. And when the other time that I've loved it is that when I've had managers, when they're bringing us context to why something is important and a priority for the team, they've personalized it. And so sort of maybe an experience that you've had at work, you're rolling out an HR initiative, or you're doing something for the team, or there's a data, platform that's being rolled out that we all have to be onboarded to. When they bring in, like, here's how this has worked for me in the past, or here's something I've experienced with this. So even bringing in your personal story, even if it's not about sort of like the stresses of your external life, all that concept I think is incredibly powerful, because it humanizes you in the best way as a leader, where people are drawn to you, want to talk to you, want to learn with you, want to share with you.
Yeah, I mean, so many great points in that. And I think, what comes up for me in that question that Lauren shared, which, thank you so much. This makes the conversation so rich when we get audience participation. It makes me ask the question, for Lauren, for whomever, which is, how do you define too much to share, right? To really just get underneath, like, what does that really mean for you? And also, what do you feel is at risk by sharing? And I think one of the personal, quick stories that I'll just share, right, is, I have type 2 diabetes, type 1, which I've kind of talked about, right? And it's one of those things that I've hidden in my career for a number of reasons, but primarily, right, not wanting to be seen as weak, not wanting people to to feel like they have a right to talk about what it is I should or shouldn't eat, and on, right? Some of this, I'm strong, blah, blah, blah. And so I wouldn't share, and then one time, without going into details, which it was very, very poor way handling of my boss, but I was in a meeting and my sugar was getting low. And he didn't know that I had type 1 because I never told him. And then I was devastated. Because I had to make a decision, which he then shamed me for. later. And then I had to say to him, like, well, this is what I have, and I chose to deal with it this way in that moment. And so I that kind of flipped a little bit for me in terms of what's too much, because some people might say it's too much to share like my personal health stuff, and other people might say this is part of me and people need to know it, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's also like what serves you, like
Yeah.
what serves you, and and secondly, are you in an environment where you can trust to be vulnerable in whatever that looks like, So just a point, because I think sometimes what happens is we've been taught to hide so much of ourselves, and we're doing it to our own detriment. And how do we flip the script on that? And how do we look at it in a new way and start to have different conversations with our leaders? And actually, sometimes we have to model it for them, because they're not necessarily showing us how this is to be done. I am curious, like your thoughts on almost like that reverse. Like, how do you have these conversations with leaders that don't freaking get it?
Yeah, I think that you said something so important, which is like sharing the things that will help you show up best, right? And in hindsight, right, not sharing that, you weren't able to just be like, hey, like
Right.
because and that person knew ahead of time. But you were cluing in, this person still shamed you, right? That they were not a safe place to go with that information. So you withheld probably for a whole host of correct contextual cues that were given to you. And I think I sometimes have a harsh answer, right, about the leaders, right? Like how do I manage up? So I think that one, it's always worth a shot, right? I think managing up is a really important another very important learned skill,
Mm.
and we have to flex it sometimes more often than we would like. But I think that sometimes if you have managed up, you've gone through the channels, you've stepped in, right? And that person is showing you that they are not capable of taking in that information and helping you show up, supporting you, right, in being effective at your job and doing well, right? Like they aren't standing with you and here to elevate your performance. It's not the right place. That's the hardest thing, right? Which is that there are more leaders like the one you described than I wish there were, but they aren't everyone. And sometimes you have to cut your losses, right? If there is someone who, when you share and you've done all the channels of managing up and trying to lead with transparency, model that, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
may be, you sometimes have to find a new place to go. And that is a very, very difficult decision because you and I have talked about this. You're like, no, no, no. But like, if I just try harder,
Right.
this person will respect me. This person will see me. This sort of, there's something about the trained, rhetoric around work ethic. And if I work hard enough, this person will value me and I will soon get, the rewards that come with that. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But I think that the original cue that you asked yourself, which is like, will sharing this piece of information ultimately help me do my best at this job? And if that's the case, I think it's important to share when it comes to managing up. And I think the other piece you're referring to, right, is that currently a lot of the power lies, right, in the dynamics between and the talent and the skills of our managers, like the people who are allegedly supposed to lead the others, right? And so part of what I like to do when we coach, and you do the same, right, is that you hope that when you're talking to staff about these concepts and training them in and developing their skills, when they too have a larger team of 3 to 5 to 20 or more, that they are able to do this better, right? But we have to bring in both managers and staff as part of the conversation, ideally, right? That the people who are currently in the roles of leading others start to understand these concepts and can really do some gut checks and self checks around where have they made some missteps, and to be honest about that with folks. That was some of the hardest piece, right? The hope is that then in hindsight, the manager who you shared that with, even if it took a beat, to say, you know what, in the end, I'm really grateful that you shared that with me. And I want to talk about how I can support you to make sure you make appointments or whatever is going on, because I value your work and I want you to be able to do your best here. And if we can equip people with the skills, because to even say that, right, even if it takes you a minute, that level of transparency and honesty, and to say, I made a misstep in how I showed up, because we all do, that's what we're asking for, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to lead to your highest ability all the time. I've done that many times with staff where it's like, you know what? I was really short in that meeting and I wasn't really taking your idea in. And that was a misstep of mine. And like, there's reasons why, and I don't need to get into it, but like, I didn't show up appropriately and I need to apologize for that. And let's
Oh my God,
remove it.
leadership taking ownership for when they get things wrong. I can't even imagine. Like, is this possible? Um,
But I appreciate the question because I think you're alluding to how scary it is, right? And I think that's also what Lauren was asking about, right?
yeah.
Whether you're leading people, you're afraid that people will see you as weak for being transparent, which I think that once you start doing it and then your performance is also where it always has been, people are like, oh, that's how you're a badass leader. Like that's actually how it goes down and you model
Yeah.
that. But then the fear on the other side, it is ultimately riskier, right? If you are doing this with a manager, because the consequences might be that something actually isn't going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And this might be the beginning of the decision-making process to find another leader within the organization to work for or to move externally. And that can be incredibly daunting. So the sort of decision to be transparent can be much more loaded when you're doing it managing up in a place where you haven't been cued,
Right.
that it is safe to talk about sort of needs in your whole self.
Yeah, which, Lauren, I don't know if you're familiar at all with Brene Brown's work. She's like the master of vulnerability, right? And like one of the things that I love that she says, right, which is vulnerability in myself. Like I view vulnerability in myself as weakness, and I view vulnerability in others as courageous. And if we could just really allow ourselves to see it in ourselves, that when we share, again, in environments that can be trusted, right? To your point, that there is great courage in it, and also I think that's part of how you see what is for you and what is not for you. And this whole conversation around, we also have to be able to identify when we're in toxic environments and when it's time to leave. Um, and I have this like belief that we just need a major uprising from the people that are in toxic environments to say no mas. I almost want to create this might sound crazy, Liz, but like I kind of want to create this massive fuck you fund where people who are in toxic environments can just know they're financially going to be okay until they get the next thing, but you just got to get out of there. And then organizations won't have a choice but to hire you so that they can have a strengths-based leadership model. What do you think?
I know. I am totally here for it because more than one time in the last 2 weeks, I've had multiple conversations where I've talked to a person who's talked about all the issues you're describing at work. And I said, you don't have to martyr yourself for this person. You don't have to martyr yourself for this organization or this company or this leader. And there is this, and they're like, oh, right? Like when you really unpack it, right? It's like, no, but like I have to do it for this school, this team, for this organization or whatever it is, or this leader has this program is depending on me. We have this outcome. No, you don't have to martyr yourself for anyone. You don't have to compromise your health. That toxicity that you're describing is so real. So yes, we need the fuck you fund because people know that it's okay. Because to be honest, the concept is very, very difficult. Like people are like, no, but we started this thing and I have to finish it even though like I hate going to work every day, but I gotta see this thing through.
Right.
And it's causing physical pain. And that is really tough, right? And so because we need a movement, right? Where people signals to people like people have the autonomy, the power to come and go. Like you need to learn to show up as with better culture, stronger leaders. Like we have to do this because people are gonna deuces on
Peace
you,
out,
and they're gonna tap into the fund unless you learn how to show up. It's not on that person.
Yeah, and I think that in the work that you do and the work that I do, right? What we're helping others find their authenticity and find their strengths, right? Because from that place, I think that is how you are able to show up in confidence, show up wholly owning who you are and all your beauty and all this stuff, and that allows you to be clearer with what you're willing to put yourself through or what you're willing to experience, or even that you have a stronger ability to be like Teflon and let things slide off of you rather than like internalize. Because I think when we're not aware of our own strengths, when we get the external feedback, we then internalize it. And that, I think, can create a huge downward spiral if we're not careful. So I'm curious, yeah, like if you have any builds on that or thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think it's very true. I think that often that it's a career changer, right? And I think you and I have talked about that before, where when
Yeah.
someone really squashes, right, the things that you do well or your how, it really stunts, right, your
Mm.
development. You can see the people who are like moving, 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 and where you're not getting that. And it really is painful and heartbreaking and sort of all of those things. I think also this idea about, really leaning into the how, right? Part of why the concept of understanding your strengths and what is my how and really owning that and being able to deploy that is that when they've done research, right? They've like stuck little things to your head is that when you're working in your strength zones, you're actually happier, you're
Mm.
more fulfilled. And so the idea that you are more attuned to what those things are. And so what are the
Mm.
kinds of things that I do during the day that allow those strengths to flourish, that put them into action, right? What's the kind of work that I do, the way that I spend my time, the ways I collaborate, interact, behave that light those things up? Because when you're able to flex those more often on a daily basis in your professional life, you're going to be happier. And so, but we have to know what those are. And there's a little
Mm.
bit of work. And I talk and so does, the Strengths Finder world talks about it this way as naming it, claiming it, and aiming it, right? I have to know what they
Mm.
are. I have to be able to claim them, recognize when they've actually shown up before, so I can more easily spot them, right?
Yeah.
When those moments are happening, and then I can put them into action. So when I say, what's the role that I want to play on this group project, or what are the kinds of cultures or environments or the types of things I want to do during my day when I'm looking for a next role, you're much more in tune with how to answer those questions and how to also then speak about yourself confidently, how to ask questions in an interview about what it is that you need. And so you can sort of assess, who am I going to be working for? What's happening at this organization or this company? And so I think that that's part of why it's so important. It really is actually, it's a joy factory, right? To work in your strength zone. And especially after the year we've all had, to be able to tap into a
Mm.
little bit more of what makes you feel good and recharged and in the zone, whether that's at home or at work, and to know how to actively go after those things. And it's not sort of like they just sort of happen to me. Oh, I happen to have a good day, right? I actually
Mm.
know how to cultivate and curate those things for myself and to tell people, other people who work beside me, hey, can I do that thing? Or,
Mm.
or at home, like, here's what I actually need a little bit from you. Here's the value that I bring. To have language to do that more fluently is just incredibly empowering in ways that can't be fully described until you've done it. Like, it's just, that's the other, I always say that the Strengths Finder process is so deeply affirming,
Mm.
right? And it really is like, it's like putting on a battery pack, right? And just like getting like a little Energizer bunny running behind you in terms of your confidence and sense of self. It's just very cool.
Yeah, I mean, even, and I have a lot of self-awareness about my own strengths, but even when you went through an exercise with me about my strengths, just how I think having it reflected back, right,
Mhm.
is and allowing it in, right? I could connect it to this idea of receiving. Like, are we allowing ourselves to receive compliments, gifts, and blessings,
Mhm.
so that we can internalize those strengths and also see them as unique, because when you're walking around with your superpowers, you just think everybody's got those superpowers, and it's like, oh no, honey child, that's all and only you do it the way that you do it, and bring it to the table the way you bring it. And and I think that within within the feedback mechanism and structures that have been built in organizations, um, I think they spend far uh, less time than they should on how do you strengthen the strengths than look at the holes and say, how do we patch those up? And it's like, how do we get away from that? Like, I don't even know why that's the orientation. Why on earth would we think that like focusing on like the areas that you're not best at is the way to get the best out of somebody? That makes absolutely no sense to me.
It's funny. So when you become a certified strengths finder coach, a really early exercise that they often do is a simple handwriting exercise to basically give an example to what you just said, which is take your non-dominant hand and try to write your name 5 times. And people are like, I mean, it is awkward. People are groaning and moaning and just deeply unhappy. And then we say, take your dominant hand and now write your name 5 times. And of course, it takes us, 15 seconds, and people are like, "Oh, thank God!" Right? And so that's 1 minute of a simple like game that we played. Imagine trying to spend your work life writing with your left hand.
Mm-hmm.
How you were moaning and groaning at the idea of just having to write your name a few times. So imagine a whole day of that, a whole week of that, a whole year of that. That's the orientation of how you're meant to be talked to and developed professionally at work. Is just like get better at writing with. That's really, really hard.
Right.
What if you took your right hand and you actually refined the perfect signature? Right? That is a much more enjoyable task, and the chances that you're actually going to do it are significantly better. I had someone once tell me that they did a speed reading program at their job, and they started off at the baseline. They did a baseline for everyone, and they found that folks who were naturally a little bit faster at reading than those who were not, once they all went through the same 6-week course, the people who had the leg up at the beginning, their speed reading abilities jumped by like 12 times. But the people who started just sort of like very average, they got 2 or 3 times better. And so also just with the truth behind it, like how do you if you want people to develop on your team, right? They have to want it, right? And writing with your left hand, if you're a righty, doesn't feel good, right? And so the chance that people are going to lean into the development that you're trying to guide them through, it's going to be a much thornier, stickier process. There is a better how. And also the truth is at the end of that road, they're going to grow in very small amounts. But there might be this, if you really amplify and invest in a strength, that is really where it becomes a superpower. And how might that work 10 times better in their role and on their team? The impact of that is so much greater. And so sometimes really like giving those hard examples, it's just, it makes it so obvious, like what you're saying, like how do we really help people do this in a way that is good for them and good for us all, right? And the culture behind that. You want a room full of people going, oh, we have to go to this training, right? Like, no, that's terrible.
Yeah, and it makes me think too of sometimes the challenge is our mindset around what we perceive as weakness, or what, because maybe we've been told that we're not good at it, but in actuality, we just do it differently. Like I remember, like I have a client, or had a client, and he viewed himself as bad at relationships, and through working together, we realized, he realized more importantly, right, that it's not that he's bad at it, it's that he does it in a way that maybe looks different than the dominant culture and the way that relationships are built. But the reality is he had a very strong ability to create relationships. And it was just about him claiming, the way that he does it is valid, and it's not a weakness, right? That it is something he's good at. So I think there's some of that of how we frame, and I think also there's a difference, I think, between saying I want to get better at something, right? Because you feel like you can, or because you want to, right? And it's coming from a place of uplifting, and not from a place of beating yourself up and saying, I should be better at this, because that word should is always like a red flag for somebody else's voice that's in your head, and so I think I just want to mark the difference between like we can work on ourselves and we can grow in areas that maybe we're not great at, but from what's our come from place,
Yeah, I think what's the origin point, right, of that conversation around growth? Because it is really important. We should be constantly developing at work, right? And you should be working under people or in places where you feel like you're growing, right? I think that is essential. But the come from place, what's the origin point of those conversations and how does that get nurtured? This concept of growth is so important. And I love it,
Right.
just the word that that thought or feeling or your how is valid. Like just so simple, right?
Yeah.
And that let's just start with like that's valid and let's start by getting curious about that.
Yeah. And I'm curious because we talked a bit about this in our kind of pre-pro call around um, when things, when our strengths can be used as labels or can be used in ways that are toxic, right? And I'm just curious if you have advice for those who maybe have had that situation or maybe will be in that situation where the organization, whether it's this, whether it's colors, whether it's Myers-Briggs, whatever it is, like, what do you do when you feel like, oh shit, this is just used as another label and another way to like make me feel like crap about myself? Like, what kinds of things can people do?
There one that makes me very angry. I don't want to say that. I told you like I was with someone talking about like yeah, I have a stigma against strengths work because people started walking around like calling you by the name of your strength. Like it was like an actual like not even referring to me by my given name. And we're not orange or whatever. We're people with all kinds of toxic behaviors. Those are just sort of like organizing principles.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that when you're faced with that, I think it's just you have to remind people what that actually represents. So people who are trying to use it as a label, it's like, oh, you want to talk about the fact that I'm an extrovert in this conversation. So what it's actually helpful. That's good that you brought that up. Let me tell you actually what that means. So for me, it means that I
Mm.
actually do a lot of really good idea generating with others. So I love our team meetings. I like that we do check-ins regularly, or I wish that we did them more often. But it also means that I need a deep recharge time to be able to get that extrovertness going, which is really where I generate a lot of good thought. And so it means that that's actually why when I leave at 5, you'll notice that I'm offline for a little bit, but then I might start sending a few emails for things that need to be wrapped up around 8:30 or 9 because I need my recharge time. I go for a run, I listen to some music, I watch a show, I eat dinner, I do whatever I do, right? And so I often say, try to use it as an opportunity. Like they're trying to use it as a label, and you remind them the actual meaning about what that
Mm.
means for your working relationship with this person and redirect them.
Mm.
Because you have the language, right? That's part of the power of some of these assessments to clue people back in. And hopefully you've gotten the coaching with those assessments, right? So you're able to you've processed some of that, right?
Right.
And are able to own some of that language even stronger. But I always try to just, calmly and powerfully reflect back what, the true meaning is without getting my stank face on, which sometimes is harder for me.
Oh, I use that stank face. Oh no, honey child, don't label me. Okay, let's call a spade, right? Because that's part of it too, which is, and again, it's stylistic, But I think we are in certainly a moment in time where there is more tolerance, or there's more, for naming things, you know. Um, and I think that that's what, sometimes that's what we have to put it out there in a way that I think in whatever way is impactful. Like what is it really going to take for somebody to be like, oh shit, like I'm using this in a negative way and not in a positive way. And that's goes back to vulnerability. That goes to like taking some risks even in the conversation. But I think there's space for that right now.
I agree. And I think that part of it is also really understanding what the adoption of a tool like this really means. So to
Mm.
say, I'm going to throw money at this culture issue, I'm going to throw money at this manager training where people just get this assessment and we walk away, or we spend a few hours one morning with some person. Um, that's how you get into those bad habits. So you've done step 1, but now you're misusing this very powerful tool,
Right.
right? That could help you in how your teams relate to one another and the
Mm.
fabric, right, of your organizational culture. And that to really understand that coaching, right, alongside these tools and typically extensive, right? So like where my managers are actually going to go through a 6 months of, we're going to meet once a month, they're going to get some one-on-one support, we're going to do these things for a team, or we're doing it at this point in January, and we're going to revisit this with that person quarterly, and making sure the person you're working with to roll out those assessments is the right fit for you,
Mm,
and that it's actual substantive work. Because more
yeah.
often than not, I have talked to folks who said, I have done X assessment, and they remember a key word, right, that came of it, but they have never actually unpacked it, know how to use it. I've even talked to a friend whose whole faculty did it at a school, and we went to dinner later that week, and I was like, oh, I'm so excited you use StrengthsFinder. We started talking about it. She was like, they didn't say anything about this, right? And that they had a whole they all did the assessment, and they got to spend 60 whole glorious minutes with this person, just sort of like learning about, I don't know what, right? Just sort of maybe some factual information about StrengthsFinder, but not really about what the
Right.
action piece. What do I do with this? What does it
Right.
really, how does it live,
Right.
right? To be a tool for good
Right.
within my life and with my organization. And it's way, way, way more common. And that's, I think, it builds the stigma, right, around the tools and the words, right, that you're talking about, whether it's disc or color, I mean, everything in between, Myers-Briggs, whatever, because it's an actual, it's a tool to be used actionably, right? Like it has meaning behind it, and there can be some really cool learnings. And I think it's a misstep, right, around what does implementation of something like this really look like organizationally, or for a team, or for an individual? And often people think it's like, but I did the assessment. And
Right.
that's actually not the
Oh,
real work. And so it leads to the labeling that you're
yes.
talking about. And it makes, I was like, when I had that dinner conversation with a friend, I was like, I can't, like, and I didn't go in deep with her. I went
Mhm,
to like very, very basic concepts. And she was like, I've learned more in our like hour
mhm.
and a half together at dinner than I did the whole time we paid someone thousands and thousands of dollars to do this for us.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm into that because, I think that for anybody watching, now or later, right? Like this kind of what we're talking about is deep work, and to really see the changes and transformation and evolution in your culture, that it is not one and done, and then there's a space for things to jolt and energize, but for truly making shifts in how people lead and in how people talk about, um, people, and opportunities, that it has to go deep, and otherwise it's just more lip service in a world in which I'm so over the lip service, right? Like that we need something deeper in order to detoxify, and in order to really get the most out of people right now, you know?
Yeah, change, the type of deep change, right, and evolution, personal and professional, that you're talking about, it's hard. Very, 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 very hard. The other tool that I often use is something called immunity to change.
Mm,
And there's a really easy research study that explains why change is so hard.
mm,
And that they talk about when you have been diagnosed with like heart disease, right? And so doctors will give you like like, here's how you have to eat to save your life.
right,
This is a matter of life and death. Only 1 in 7 people will change their eating habits. So when it's a matter of life and death,
right.
we still, for the most part, struggle deeply to make true change, behavior change. That's how hard change is. When you talk about the
Yeah.
deepness of the work, right? That you have coaching relationships that are deep and substantive, that really get to root causes and support people see their whole self, like really get into it. This idea of the client you talk about really feeling validated, right? In their how. That's deep and hard work. Like our brains and bodies are hardwired to stay with whatever we know to date. And so the depth of the work, I just think, is so important. And I think it really speaks to the potential and the power of coaching relationships, whether that be individual or
Mm.
team or larger. And that when you really are willing to make that deeper investment, the chances, right, of the real change taking hold is much more likely. And it really accepts the reality about how hard that work really is.
Yeah. So tell me, like, how can people like work with you? How can they find out more? Like, because I'm just sitting here going, man, if I had a team, I'd be like, sign me up. That's where my budget dollars are going first, you know?
I appreciate that vote of confidence. Yeah, no, you can find me on my website, kahnconsultants.com. You can find me on IG here now. You can DM me, but you can contact me there. You can email me at liz@kahnconsultants.com. And I love even just having discovery exploratory calls with folks just about their teams and the challenges they're facing, and to see if there's some solutions that I might be able to offer, things that we can do together to move the needle. And I also, if you're an individual who wants to dig into your own strengths as you're thinking about so many folks come to me and say, I have this idea that something needs to change in my work life, but I've been thinking about it for a while. I'm not really sure where to go, and I need some tools, right, to navigate this transition. Reach out. I have lots of individual clients, and I will be launching in the next week or two a new program that is specifically geared towards moms. So parents who are struggle and have it hard all the time, right? They are doing the work. And to really think about using StrengthsFinder to build some confidence around what am I good at? What makes me excited? What makes me happy? And some real, that immunity to change work that I mentioned, right? To really do some, how do I reach a goal that I want in 2021? So really for moms who are renegotiating the relationship with work, whether that's I'm home right now, I'm going back to work, I'm part-time, I'm thinking about going full-time, I'm full-time, I'm thinking about going part-time, that renegotiation between that parenting balance and that traditional work balance. And that this is a program that I specifically designed for women in that journey because it's personal to me and the circle of people in my life. And I just think these tools are incredibly powerful to give people what they need to really get where they want to go, and just that confidence, feel good affirmation to tackle that journey. Ooh. And so I'll be posting that on my site and putting it on IG. And so you can find me all those ways, but those are the things that are ahead.
Oh, wow, that's so amazing, especially now in this, era that we're kind of having a C-session, or she-session, I should say, right? With a lot of women pulling back or pulling out, and struggling with what that looks like. And I love the term that you use. Gosh, I can't pull it up, but renegotiating, right? I love that. It's in that, I think I just want to offer that people can start to take this conversation right now and start to make shifts where they currently are. We train people how to treat us, and we can always retrain. We can always, stand up and say, okay, let me show you how my strengths can be honored, so that you can get the best out of me. We can start to have those conversations now, no matter what situation we're in. And hopefully people will have gained a few tools from this conversation in order to do that.
I hope so too. And thank you so much for having us. Every time we talk, I'm inspired. I'm thinking about new ideas and things. I love your approach to how you coach and how you ask questions and just your authenticity. I always say I loved it because I didn't do it this much because I think this is obviously being recorded, but the F-bomb, the let it be free, and just be myself. I just appreciate that you do really model the kinds of concepts that we're talking about. And so thank you for holding space for me today and for so many others. I just really appreciate it.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I receive that. I appreciate that. Because there's always voices in my head going, why are you swearing on Instagram? It's not necessary.
It's not necessary for them.
It's necessary for me. But this was great, and I look forward to us continuing to build our relationship, and however I can support you in the work that you do, I'm happy to do that, and look forward to one person at a time making a difference, and that's what you're doing. And so keep on going on this entrepreneurial path, which I know is it's a roller coaster, but don't give up.
Thank you so much, and I'm excited for what's ahead for us too.
Thanks. All right, well, I think that's a wrap, and so ciao for now. I'll see you next time.
Sounds good.
All right. Guys. Take care.